The Invisible
Why were
Champion.
you two fighting?
There is a moment rare and strange when a high school hallway goes completely silent. Not the silence of an empty building at night, not the quiet of a library or a chapel. Something different, something that stops even the air from moving. This was that moment. The hallway of Westbrook High stretched out like a long exhale, lockers on both sides, scuffed linoleum underfoot, fluorescent lighting that made everyone look a little sick and a little tired. There were students everywhere. Backpacks, half-open sneakers, squeaking conversations bouncing off hard surfaces. The ordinary chaos of a Thursday morning in October in the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio. And then, nothing. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every footstep paused. Phones lowered. Eyes moved toward the center of the hallway, drawn there, the way eyes move toward something they cannot name but cannot look away from. A girl stood in the middle of it all. She was not tall, not imposing in any way a stranger might notice from a distance. Dark hair pulled back, a worn backpack hanging from one shoulder. Eyes that were steady in a way that very few 16-year-old eyes ever get to be. She stood still, not frozen, not afraid, still in the way that only people who have trained their bodies to obey them completely ever learn to stand. And on the floor, sitting with his back against a row of lockers, was Cole Hargrove, 17 years old, 6 feet. The kind of boy who had learned early that the world made room for people who demanded it. He sat with one hand pressed to his shoulder, not looking up. Not at the crowd, not at her. His jaw was tight, his eyes pointed at the linoleum the way a person looks when they are trying very hard to hold something in. Around them, students stood at a distance that felt like more than a few feet. It felt like a perimeter. Like something had happened in that hallway that nobody fully understood, but everybody knew instinctively and completely that they had just witnessed. The girl looked at Cole for a long moment. She did not gloat, did not look to the crowd for approval, did not straighten up with the posture of someone who had just won something. She looked at Cole the way you might look at a problem you had solved, not with triumph, but with a quiet resolution, like a door that had been closed. Then she adjusted the strap of her backpack and walked down the hallway, and the crowd parted for her without anyone deciding to do it. That was Thursday morning. This story begins 48 hours earlier. Part 1, the quiet one, Tuesday. Her name was Sloane Reeves. She stood on the sidewalk outside Westbrook High at 7:42 in the morning, looking at the building the way she had learned to look at every building that was about to become part of her life. Not with dread, not with excitement, with assessment, the way a chess player looks at a board before sitting down. Where are the exits? Where does the crowd move? Where is the light? Westbrook High was a 2-story brick building constructed in the 1970s and renovated just enough every decade or so to avoid looking completely abandoned. The gymnasium addition on the east side was newer, cleaner brick, different mortar, a small brass plaque beside the entrance that caught her eye for a moment before she moved on. The parking lot smelled like wet asphalt and exhaust from the line of school buses idling along the back fence. She had done this 5 times before. Stood on a sidewalk, read a building, walked inside. A new name on a class roster, a new locker combination, a new cafeteria with a different layout, different smells, a different set of invisible rules about where you sit and what that says about you. 5 schools in 4 years. She was 16 years old. People sometimes heard that number and assumed the worst. Trouble, instability, a family falling apart at the seams. Her mother worked in medical device logistics, which meant she worked remotely, which meant they could live anywhere, which meant that when things became necessary, they moved. Simple as that. Her mother had explained this to school administrators with careful patience every single time, and every time the administrator had nodded with the expression of someone who understood the words, but not what was underneath them. What was underneath them was this. Every school for approximately the first 4 to 6 weeks was manageable. Sloane was quiet. She did her work. She found a seat near the middle of most classrooms, not the front, which attracted attention from teachers, not the back, which attracted attention from everyone else. She ate lunch. She got her homework done. She was by every measurable standard an unremarkable student in the best possible sense of that word. And then inevitably someone would see something they were not supposed to see. A movement too fast, a balance too precise, fingers that placed objects down with a control that was not normal for a teenager. Or sometimes it was something smaller, the way she automatically shifted her weight when someone came up behind her, a pivot so smooth and so unconscious that it looked like she had simply decided to turn around, when in fact every nerve in her body had registered an approach from behind and responded before she finished deciding what to do. And then someone would look her up online. Sloane Reeves, age 14, World Youth Karate Championship Prague, gold medal under 60 kilogram division. Then again at 15, gold medal same division Seoul. Then again at 16, and this one had made it into the sports section of an Ohio newspaper. Small but their gold medal under 60 kilogram division Monterrey, Mexico. 3 times. The Ohio article described her as a once-in-a-generation talent. Her coach at the time had said she was the most technically precise competitor he had worked with in 30 years. The Federation president had said something about her future in the sport that she had not let herself think about too much since then. Once people knew she stopped being a student, she became a subject. Teachers mentioned her in class unprompted when the topic of discipline or self-control came up. Students followed her to the parking lot asking for demonstrations. She had been asked at her 4th school to give a speech at an assembly. She had declined, which made things worse in a way that a public speech probably would not have. A boy at her 3rd school had shoved her from behind in the parking lot, apparently having decided that her refusal to demonstrate was evidence of fraud. She had caught herself before she fell. She had turned around slowly. She had looked at him. And he had taken 3 steps backward without understanding exactly why. She had not hit him. She had not needed to. But the look on his face, that combination of adrenaline and confusion and suddenly recalibrated understanding of exactly who he was standing next to, was the look she had been trying to avoid producing in people. It was the look that turned her into something other than a person. So they moved, and now it was Tuesday morning in Columbus, Ohio, and she was reading the building. The main office smelled like burnt coffee and toner. A woman behind the front desk handed her a printed schedule, a locker assignment, and a laminated map of the school that had been photocopied so many times the edges of the rooms were beginning to blur. Then a door opened, and a woman in her mid-40s stepped out. She introduced herself as the school counselor. She had the kind of face that had been trained professionally and, over many years, not to reveal what it was thinking. She shook Sloane's hand, asked a few questions about the transition, about whether Sloane needed anything, about how she could be helpful during the adjustment period. Sloane answered each question honestly and briefly. The counselor nodded at each answer with the expression of someone filing information away rather than simply receiving it. Before Sloane left, she noticed without meaning to, because noticing things without meaning to was the condition she lived in, that the counselor had a manila folder on her desk that she turned slightly so that the label was facing away from the door. Then the counselor said something quietly, almost to herself, not to Sloane, not to the room. "Let her have this one." Sloane paused for just a half second. Then she adjusted her backpack and walked out into the hallway. She would think about those 5 words later. She would think about them on Wednesday night, lying in the dark trying to understand the shape of what was coming. And on Friday morning, standing in a corridor with a file in her hand, she would understand them completely. The hallway was exactly what she had expected, which was its own small comfort. Westbrook High in the first 10 minutes of a Tuesday morning was a system running on familiar patterns. Students moved in loose currents along the edges, thicker near the locker banks, thinner near classroom doors. Volume spiked near intersections and dropped near the administrative wing. The social geography made itself apparent within 40 seconds, not because it was labeled anywhere, but because human beings sort themselves by familiarity, and familiarity is visible to anyone who knows how to look. She found her locker, worked the combination. It stuck on the 2nd number, which she adjusted for on her next try. She organized her books by period and placed her backpack in with the precision that had become, after enough years, entirely automatic. An outside observer might have noticed that her notebooks were arranged with their spines facing the same direction. She would not have been able to explain why, other than that things worked better when they were where they were supposed to be. She was closing the locker when she became aware of him, not through any dramatic mechanism. She simply became aware in the way her body collected information at the edges of conscious thought that someone was performing for an audience nearby, and that the performance was calibrated to fill space and establish hierarchy, and that she was about to walk through the field of it. Cole Hargrove was holding court at the intersection of the main hallway and the corridor that led toward the gymnasium. He was 17 with the build of a boy who had grown fast and learned to use the space that growth had given him. Not a bully in any cartoonish sense, nothing so simple. He was laughing at something or making something funny, she couldn't quite tell which. A group of students laughed along the way. People laugh when laughter is the social currency being spent. 2 boys stood slightly behind him, and to the right, the geometry of support of borrowed proximity to something they found valuable. One of them, stocky, wearing a hoodie with the Westbrook football logo across the chest, leaned in and said something into Cole's ear with a directional glance attached to it, and Cole's eyes came up, found her, and a recognizable quality entered his expression. She had seen that quality before, the quality of someone who had identified with the automatic confidence of long practice, something they perceived as an easy mark. She kept walking. She angled her shoulder, found the gap in the crowd, and moved to walk around him. He stepped into her path. Not violently, not yet. Just a casual physical assertion of someone who had done this enough times that it no longer felt like a decision, a test, an invitation to react. She stopped, looked at him. He smiled. It was a good smile, she noticed, the kind that had probably worked on teachers and parents and anyone who wasn't paying attention to what lived behind it. A smile designed to make the recipient feel that the problem was their own failure to appreciate the situation. She looked at him for one more moment, then moved to go around him on the other side. He matched her movement. From behind her, the boy in the football hoodie, whose name she would learn later was Briggs, said something low that carried the acoustic signature of someone performing for an audience of two. Cole didn't look at Briggs. He kept his eyes on her. His smile stayed, which was its own kind of tell. She stopped again, waited. In her experience, this was the moment that almost always resolved itself. Most people, even people who had come this far, who had initiated this choreography, most people, when met with stillness instead of reaction, when denied the energy their escalation was feeding on, would redirect. Make it into a joke. Find a different audience. Drift away. Cole Hargrove looked at her stillness and decided it was something he could fill. His hand moved fast and sharp and knocked her books from the bottom. The impact sent them scattering across the floor, a clean, practiced motion, the kind that comes from having done the same thing enough times that it requires no thought. A small sound moved through the crowd nearby, the held breath kind that acknowledges something has crossed a line without committing to what happens next. Sloane looked at her books on the floor, crouched down, started picking them up. Not because she was afraid, not to signal submission, simply because the books needed to be picked up, and the most efficient path through this moment was not the one that escalated it. She had made this calculation in the time it took to recognize that escalation would require her to use things she had spent 10 years being taught were not for this, not for hallways, not for boys with borrowed confidence and something hollow behind their eyes. She was looking at the books when it happened. The backpack had hit the floor when she crouched. In the chaos of the crowd, pressing in phones, rising, all attention pointed at her and at the scattered notebooks. Nobody was watching the backpack. And somewhere in the 18 seconds between it hitting the floor and her hand reaching for it again, Cole Hargrove crouched beside it under the cover of the crowd's noise and attention and took the one thing that had come loose from the inner pocket, a gold medal on a worn navy ribbon. He closed his hand around it and stood back up before anyone was looking at anything other than the new girl collecting her things. She did not see this happen. She would not know it had happened until after school. He would know from the moment his hand closed around it that he had found something worth keeping. She kept gathering her books. Cole's voice came from above, and behind her, now louder, performing for a wider audience that had thickened without anyone deciding to stop and watch. She kept her head down, kept her hands moving. And then the kick came, not at her backpack, sharp and sudden, the way a person kicks something when they want the spectacle of the fall rather than the injury. The kind of kick that assumed the target would go forward, would lose balance, would provide the moment of collapse the whole performance had been building toward. The world shifted. Or more precisely, Sloane shifted. This was the thing people who had never trained at her level could not quite understand at a certain point. After enough repetitions, the body stops waiting for instructions. It perceives the input, the force, the angle, and responds before the thinking mind has finished its sentence. The response is not mindless. It is precise. It has been shaped by 10,000 hours of corrections and the patient, relentless work of learning to do one thing exactly right. Her foot planted. Her weight dropped and centered so that the kick found nothing to push against. Her body turned in a pivot so compact and fluid that most people watching would later disagree about exactly what they had seen. Some said she stepped to the side. Some said she spun. One student standing at the right angle would describe it as looking like water moving around stone, which was probably the most accurate account, even though he had no framework for why. Cole's force had been going somewhere. Now it had nowhere to go. He went with it. He hit the locker bank hard enough for the sound to carry down the entire hallway. Metal on back, the flat impact of a body that had expected resistance and found air instead. The hallway stopped. Every sound, every movement, every conversation stopped. Cole scrambled upright, and this was the moment she recognized before it fully arrived, the moment when pride takes the controls. When the audience size stops being a reason to de-escalate and becomes the reason it is no longer possible. His face was red, his eyes had changed. Whatever performance he had been giving was over, and what remained was simpler and older and more dangerous. He came at her again. His hand found her wrist. He grabbed it the way people grab things when they need to feel they have hold of something, when the world has just shown them they do not have hold of as much as they believed. And in the half second between his grip closing and what came next, Sloane Reeves made the hardest decision she had ever been asked to make on any mat in any country. The technique was already arriving, called for muscle memory, the way a word arrives on the tongue before you've decided to speak. The decision was not which technique. The decision was how far to take it. She had been trained to end situations. She chose instead to stop them. Her wrist turned inside his grip, not against the force, but with it slipping through the mechanical disadvantage of his hold. Her body moved behind him in one fluid step. Her hands found his arm and shoulder with a precision that was not cruel and was not accidental. It was architectural. She applied pressure to exactly the right angles, and Cole Hargrove found himself in a position his body recognized at a deep and inarguable level as a position from which he could not move. She held it for exactly long enough. Then she let go. Stepped back. The hallway remained frozen. She could feel the phones. Not see them, feel them. The raised arms, the small glowing rectangles. She had felt this in competition and had never found a way to make herself indifferent to it. Cole straightened slowly. His shoulder moved, testing something. His face had traveled through several rooms since this started and arrived somewhere harder to read. Not the red of a moment ago. Something quieter and more complicated. She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither said anything for a moment, the kind of moment that has weight. Then she said quietly enough that people recording it would have to turn up their volume to hear, "Don't kick people." That was all. She turned and walked away. The cafeteria at Westbrook High organized itself along a logic she understood within 90 seconds of entering. Long tables in the center, smaller tables along the south windows, the serving line running along the east wall. Social stratification legible and consistent as it always was. Proximity to windows indicated status, proximity to walls indicated the opposite, and the round tables near the emergency exit were where you sat when you were new. She sat near the emergency exit. She was halfway through her lunch when the girl with glasses sat down across from her. Sloane had noticed her earlier in second period writing in a small notebook with the focus of someone who was definitely not taking class notes. "You're Sloane," the girl said, not a question. "Yes?" "Marin," she set her tray down, looked at Sloane with the frank attention of someone who was professionally interested in accurate descriptions of things. "Everyone's been scared of Cole Hargrove for 2 years. Today you made him look like he slipped on ice." Sloane ate. "People think you're a hero right now," Marin said. "I want you to know that before you start believing it." Something about this was different from what Sloane had expected. She looked at Marin more carefully. "That's not a compliment," Marin said, reading her correctly. "When people decide someone is a hero, they stop looking at them like a person. That's already starting. I've been watching it happen for the last 40 minutes. Sloane looked across the cafeteria. She could feel the attention from a dozen different directions, the careful sideways kind that pretends not to be looking. "I know," Sloane said. "What you did," Marin said, pausing to find an accurate word rather than an impressive one, "was real. I don't know exactly what it was, but it was real." "I didn't stand up to him," Sloane said. "I just stopped him from hurting someone." "You stopped him from hurting you," Marin said. "That's what I meant." Marin wrote something in her notebook. She did not offer to show Sloane what it said, and Sloane did not ask. At a table near the far wall, Cole's table, the one around which the school's social geometry had organized itself, Cole sat with Briggs and two other boys. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the surface of the table, and his right hand was doing something in his pocket, turning something over and over. She noticed this. She did not yet know what he was turning. She would. After the final bell, she took the long way to her locker. Let the crowd thin. Let the noise settle. Her locker stuck on the second number. She made the adjustment. She was zipping her backpack when she noticed it was lighter than it should have been. She went through the main compartment. Books, folder, charger, water bottle. She went through the front pocket. Pencil case, card holder. She unzipped the small interior pocket where she kept the things she did not need every day, but could not leave behind. The photograph from Prague was there, her mother on one side and her coach on the other, the medal around her neck, all three of them squinting into a low afternoon sun. The small folded letter from the Federation confirming her ranking, which she kept not out of vanity, but because it was easier than reconstructing the paperwork if she ever needed it. And the medal, the gold medal from Seoul, the second one. She kept it not because it was the most prestigious, but because the ribbon was worn in a specific spot. Her thumb had rubbed the edge of it through 2 years of competition nerves, which meant the fabric there was softer than the rest. She could find it in the dark by feel alone. The medal was not there. She stood at her open locker for a long moment. She thought back through the sequence. The backpack on the floor. The books. She had been looking at the books when she picked them up. She had not been watching the backpack. Cole had taken it. She understood this without anger, with the efficiency she used for everything quickly, without sentiment, trying to see the shape of the situation rather than only its surface. He had something now that he didn't yet know the full value of, but he had recognized it as hers, which meant he had recognized it as something she cared about, which meant that someone who had already decided to be bothered by her now had a tool. She closed her locker. She stood in the empty hallway for a moment, not because she was uncertain about what to do next, but because some things deserve a moment before you move past them. Then she shouldered her backpack and walked out. The building looked different on this reading. Same brick, same entrance, same plaque beside the gymnasium. But a building reads differently once you know something about what it contains and what it is willing to do with that knowledge. She walked home. The medal was gone. And 48 hours from now, a hallway full of students would stand in complete silence, watching a moment that neither she nor Cole had intended to create and that neither of them would be able to put back in the box it had come from. But that was 48 hours away. Right now, it was just Tuesday, just Columbus, just a 16-year-old girl walking home with a lighter backpack than she'd left with, trying to stay invisible in a world that had already decided she was worth watching. Part 2. The Breaking Point. The video had 2,300 views by the time Cole Hargrove got home that evening. He knew this because Briggs had texted him the number at 3 separate points during the afternoon as if the count were a scoreboard, and Briggs wanted him to know he was losing. Cole had not responded to any of the texts. He had driven home the long way past the reservoir, the route he took when he needed 11 extra minutes to arrange his face into something that would satisfy the requirements of walking through his front door. The house was a 4-bedroom colonial on the west side of a development called Whispering Pines, which had no pines and made no sound particular to whispering. It had been furnished with the thoroughness of someone who wanted visitors to understand immediately upon entering that the people inside had done well. The furniture was heavy. The photographs on the walls were large and well-framed. Many featured the same man at various points across 25 years, a younger version in a university football uniform, number 54, one shoulder pad, always slightly higher than the other, a middle version at business events, hand outstretched in a permanent handshake, and the current version, which was the version Cole shared a house with, broader across the shoulders than the university photographs, the jaw, heavier, the eyes the same. Warren Hargrove did not look up when Cole came in. He was sitting in the armchair that faced the television, and the television was off. Warren watched sports the way other people watch the news, as a continuous background condition of being alive and informed. The television being off meant Warren had turned it off deliberately, which meant he was waiting. Cole set his backpack down by the door. He had learned young not to let a bag hit the floor with any more sound than necessary. "Sit down," Warren said. Cole sat. Warren looked at him, not angry in any volcanic way. The look of a man performing a precise assessment of something that had disappointed him, the way a contractor looks at a wall framed incorrectly, not with emotion, but with the interest of someone calculating how much work the mistake is going to create. "I saw it," Warren said. "Twice. I watched it twice to make sure I was seeing what I thought I was seeing." Outside, a car passed on the street. The sound came and went. "You went after a girl," Warren said, "in a school hallway in front of every phone in the building, and she put you on the floor twice." He paused, let the number sit. "You're a Hargrove. I've never had to tell you what that means. I shouldn't have to tell you now." He stood from the armchair with the ease of a man who kept himself in reasonable physical condition and considered this its own form of argument. "You figure out what you're going to do about it." He walked out of the room. The sound of the refrigerator opening and closing came from the kitchen. Then the television in there turned to something with crowd noise. Cole sat in the armchair that faced the off television. His hand was in his pocket. Had been since 7th period, when he'd first held the thing he'd taken from the floor of the hallway, taken in the seconds when everyone was watching her gather her books and nobody was watching him. He took it out now. It was a medal, Gold or gold-colored, he didn't know enough about these things to tell the difference. Round, heavier than he'd expected for its size. The ribbon attached to it was navy and white, the colors faded at the edges the way of something handled many times over a long period. On the face was a stylized figure in stance arms controlled 1 foot forward. Around the edge in small, raised lettering, International Youth Karate Federation, World Championship, Seoul. He turned it over. On the back, in lettering, added separately from the casting, Sloane Reeves, under 60 kilograms. First place. He sat with this for a while. He thought about the hallway, about the moment he had grabbed her wrist and found himself in a position he could not move from, not because of pain, but because the geometry of the hold had made movement simply impossible. As if she had found the exact coordinates where his own skeleton was working against him. World Championship. First place. His thumb ran along the edge of the ribbon, which was softer in one spot than the rest. He noticed this without knowing what it meant. He put the medal back in his pocket, took out his phone. He sat in the chair and thought for a while without doing anything with the phone. There was something Warren had said to him when he was 11 or 12, said without drama, the way a person states a fact of geography. He had said information is leverage, and leverage is the only thing that matters when the physical situation doesn't favor you. He had said this in the context of a business negotiation, and Cole had not fully understood it at the time, but he had retained it the way children retain things that arrive with a certain authority. Over the years, the understanding had filled in around the retention like concrete around rebar. He looked at the phone. He put it back in his pocket. Not yet. But he knew with the certainty of a boy who had grown up in a house where information was leverage that the medal was something. He didn't yet know exactly what. But it belonged to her, and she had not realized she had lost it, which meant she wouldn't be looking for where it had gone, which meant he had time to figure out what a world championship medal in karate, taken from the pocket of the school's new quiet girl, was actually worth. He sat in the chair until the light was gone from the window. Then he went upstairs. Wednesday at Westbrook High had the texture of a day that knows it is living in the shadow of the day before. Sloane arrived at 7:38 and walked through the front entrance and registered in the first 10 seconds that she had become a different kind of visible. Not the uncomfortable notoriety of Tuesday, something more settled and in some ways more difficult to navigate. People move through the hallway with the self-consciousness of those aware they were present for something and are now deciding how to hold that in their bodies. Some looked at her directly, some looked away too quickly. A group of girls near the south stairwell stopped talking as she passed and resumed at a lower volume once she was 4 steps past. She walked to her locker, made the second number adjustment. The locker opened on the second try. In first period, a teacher delivered a lecture on the causes of the First World War with the rhythm of someone who had given it enough times that the words had worn smooth grooves in the delivery. Sloane took notes with compressed efficiency. At the desk, 2 rows to her right, a boy watched the hallway video on his phone under the desk, angled toward her as though checking her against the recording to see if they matched. She looked at her notebook. After class, Marin fell into step beside her without announcing herself. "You have about 48 hours, Marin said. Sloane looked at her. "Before the next thing happens. That's usually how it works with Cole. He doesn't let things sit." "You've seen this before. I've been at this school for 3 years." She said this without bitterness, with the tone of someone offering documented fact. "The Hargroves have been a feature here longer than that. Cole's older brother played football here. Warren Hargrove, Cole's dad, has been on the booster board since before I arrived. He donated the money for the weight room addition." "There's a plaque." She paused. "I noticed you looked at it." Sloane had glanced at the plaque beside the gymnasium entrance on Tuesday morning. She had not thought about it again until now. "What does it say?" Sloane asked. "Warren T. Hargrove, in recognition of outstanding support." Marin's voice carried no contempt. It was precise, like a notation in a ledger. $50,000 buys a plaque. It also buys a certain amount of patience from administration when the donor's son has a difficult week. They stopped at a hallway intersection. The current of students moved and divided around them. "Tell me about Cole," Sloane said. Marin adjusted her glasses, not nervously, but the way someone does when looking at something more carefully. "Something that isn't on the video," Sloane added. "He could draw," Marin said. "This is not something many people know because it was a while ago, but in 8th grade before he came here, he was, from what I heard from people who saw it, genuinely talented. The kind of thing that gets noticed by an art teacher in a real way, not a participation ribbon way." Sloane said nothing. Waited. Freshman year, there was a thing. He'd been keeping a sketchbook, still drawing at that point. His dad came to a football game and found out about it somehow, and after the game in the parking lot in front of maybe 15 or 20 people, she stopped, started again. Warren Hargrove took the sketchbook out of Cole's bag and dropped it in a trash can outside the field house, in front of the team, and then he said something. Different people remember different versions of the exact words, but they all agree on the shape of it. She paused. Hargroves don't draw. They win. The hallway moved and sorted and rushed around them. Sloan stood still. She was thinking about Cole's hand in his pocket at the cafeteria table yesterday. The thing he had been turning over and over in there. She had assumed it was his phone. She thought now about what else it might have been. She thought about a boy sitting alone in a room with something that belonged to someone else trying to figure out what it was worth. She thought about the look Cole had given her in the hallway, not the performance, not the anger, but something underneath, both the look of a person who had been trained over a long time to convert every situation into a competition and who had recently lost one and who was now locating the arena where he could still win. He's not going to let it go, Sloan said. No, Marin said. The bell rang. The hallway thinned. Sloan walked to her next class. She did not tell Marin about the medal, not yet. There were things she was still working out about what was coming, and until she understood the shape of it better, giving Marin information meant giving the situation information she hadn't yet decided to give it. But she walked to third period with a different quality of awareness than she'd had that morning. Not fear. Something older and more useful. Preparation. The post went up at 11:47 during the 15 minutes between the end of fifth period and the beginning of sixth. She didn't see it herself. She was in the hallway heading toward the science wing when she heard the sound around her change, not louder, but different, the way sound changes when it organizes itself around a single point. Phone screens brightening, heads tilting together. The low hum of a piece of information moving through a population of connected people who are all looking at the same thing. Briggs had posted it, but the content was Cole's. A photograph of the medal held in someone's hand against a plain surface, the text on the front clearly legible. The ribbon. The gold face. Above the photograph, a caption written with the craft of someone aiming for a specific effect. Your hero's been lying to all of you. She's not a regular student. She's a professional. Look it up. Below the photograph, a screenshot, a search result. Her name, her results, the article from the Ohio paper with the photograph of her on the podium in Monterey. She stood in the hallway and looked at this on Marin's phone, which Marin had appeared beside her with screen, first saying nothing. She looked at it for the length of time it took to understand each element of what she was looking at. Then she handed the phone back. How many people have seen it? She said. It's a school account, about 800 followers, but it's being reshared. Sloan nodded once. She walked to sixth period, sat down and opened her notebook. The class was discussion format English. Today they were examining whether Gatsby is a sympathetic character or a cautionary one. Sloan had read the book at her previous school and had opinions about it, but she kept them inside today, which meant she was watching the room rather than participating in it, which meant she was watching her classmates. And she noticed when two of them checked phones under their desks and then looked at her and then looked away. She looked at the board. The teacher wrote in marker. What does Gatsby want that money can't actually buy? Sloan thought about this longer than the teacher intended. The call to the principal's office came during seventh period, and it was for Cole, not for her. She learned this from Marin, who was in the same period, and received a text from someone with a view of the administrative corridor. Cole had been asked to come in, door closed, the sound of adult voices, the atmospheric pressure of consequences being assembled. The news moved through the student population with the speed of news everyone had been waiting for. People straightened slightly in their seats. The sensation was palpable. The system was going to do the thing the system was supposed to do. There would be accountability. There would be the satisfaction of watching a situation resolve itself through proper channels. Sloan felt none of this. She had navigated enough school systems to know that proper channels were real and sometimes worked and were also shaped always everywhere by things that existed outside them. She thought about the brass plaque beside the gymnasium. She was still thinking about this when seventh period ended, and Marin appeared beside her with an expression that had moved from cautious optimism to something more careful. Warren Hargrove is here, Marin said quietly. Sloan stopped walking. He came to the school. He's in the principal's office. Nobody called him. He just showed up. Sloan looked down the hallway toward the administrative wing. She thought about a man who sits in rooms as though they belong to him because enough rooms have over enough time deferred to his presence that the distinction between ownership and expectation has become meaningless to him. Who told you, Sloan said. The secretary who handles the front office schedules eats lunch in the same room as the newspaper staff. Marin said simply as an explanation of information infrastructure. She said it without pride. It was just how things worked. 24 minutes after Warren Hargrove walked into the principal's office uninvited, Cole Hargrove walked out of it. He walked down the hallway with his hands in his pockets and his jaw set in the configuration of someone who has just been through something and has decided that the only acceptable response is to look like nothing happened. Briggs fell into step beside him at the intersection near the gymnasium. They walked together toward the parking lot exit. Cole did not look at Sloan, but as he passed the point that put him approximately 8 feet from where she was standing, his hand moved in his jacket pocket and she saw the chain of the metal's ribbon catch the fluorescent light for half a second between his fingers before his fist closed around it again. She watched him go. Marin said carefully, "What was that? My medal," Sloan said. Marin turned to look at her. "He picked it up in the hallway Tuesday. I didn't see it happen. I noticed it was gone after. And you didn't say anything. I was working out what it meant. And what does it mean?" Sloan watched Cole's back disappear around the corner. "It means he had something to show the people in that room," she said. "And now we know whether the plaque matters more than the procedure." Marin said nothing. The principal's office door did not open again for 41 minutes. When it finally did, the secretary who came out to the front desk had the expression of someone returning from a meeting where the outcome had not been exactly what anyone had intended when they scheduled it. Marin said quietly to Sloan and to no one in particular, "Nothing's going to happen to him." "I know," Sloan said. "The principal is a decent man," Marin said with the precision of someone careful about attribution, "but he's in a building with a $50,000 weight room and a plaque with a specific name on it, and the person with that name is currently sitting in his office. That's not a character problem. That's a physics problem." Sloan turned a page in her textbook. "Warren will say Cole didn't take the medal technically because you dropped it. There'll be a lawyer's version of that somewhere, and they're going to come at you next, officially, with the formal language. Cole grabbed your wrist and you responded, and they're going to call that a conduct issue." "Can they do that?" Sloan said. "They can try," Marin said. "Whether it works is a different thing." Sloan closed her textbook. She sat for a moment with the stillness that was not the absence of motion, but the presence of something being held very still against pressure. "The hearing is Friday morning," Marin said. "Main conference room off the administrative wing. Parent-faculty board. Warren will be there. He's asked that your records be pulled, your full records." Sloan understood what this meant. Her full records contained in the supplementary materials that traveled with every enrollment transfer the complete documentation of her competitive history. The records that made the hallway not a defensive response by an ordinary girl, but a professional act by a trained competitor. The weapon Cole had found in the medal was the same weapon Warren Hargrove was now about to aim at a school board. She sat with this for exactly as long as it needed. Then she picked up her water bottle and drank from it and set it back down. She was not going to do the math on leaving. Not this time. Leaving always made a certain kind of sense in the arithmetic of short-term relief and long-term cost until the moment you looked at what you were leaving and asked yourself what the leaving taught. She thought about a sketchbook dropped into a trash can in front of 15 people. She thought about what it costs a person, the long compounding interest of a thing like that. Year after year, energy converted from one form into another because the original form was declared wrong and thrown away in front of witnesses. She thought about Friday. "Is the meeting open?" she said. Marin looked at her with the expression of someone whose category for Sloan was shifting again. Technically, Marin said school board proceedings in Ohio have public access provisions. Student disciplinary hearings carry a conditional access clause for the student directly involved. She paused. "I looked it up last night. Section 11.4 of the Ohio Administrative Code." She opened her notebook to a page near the back and tore it out with careful precision, folded it twice and held it across the table. Sloan took it. 8:15, Marin said. "Main conference room." Sloan put the folded paper in her jacket pocket. She picked up her books. She walked out of the library into the corridor. The jacket pocket slightly heavier than it had been in the way that preparation always adds weight before it subtracts it. So, Part 3, what winning actually looks like. Friday morning arrived the way consequential mornings tend to quietly and earlier than seemed fair. Sloan was awake before her alarm. She lay in the bed in the room she had been living in for 3 weeks and looked at the ceiling and ran through what she knew, way she once ran through a match sequence before competition. Not anxiously, methodically, the way you check equipment before you use it. The meeting was at 8:15 in the main conference room off the administrative wing. Warren Hargrove would be there, which meant the room would carry a gravity before anyone said a word. The gravity of a man who had learned that his presence was itself an argument. The principal would be there, board members Cole. She had not been invited. She had a folded piece of paper in her jacket pocket with the relevant language from the Ohio Administrative Code written out in Marin's compact and precise handwriting. She had read it 3 times before sleeping. She got up at 5:47. Made coffee. Her mother was already at the kitchen table, coffee in hand, phone face down. Her mother's version of giving her space. They sat together for a while without talking. Her mother was a woman who had grown up in a family where the women were expected to be quiet about competence, who had watched her daughter at the age of 6 begin training with a focus that most adults never locate in themselves, and had decided very early that her job was not to explain this to the world, but to create the conditions in which it could exist without being broken. She had moved them 5 times. She had sat in 5 administrative offices with a carefully neutral expression. She had never once in Sloane's hearing described any of this as a sacrifice. "You don't have to go in there," her mother said. "I know," Sloane said. "I can handle it. I've been in enough of these rooms." "I know you have." Sloane looked at her coffee. "I need to go in, but not for the reason they think." Her mother looked at her for a long moment. "Then we go," she said. The parking lot of Westbrook High at 750 had a different quality than it held during the school day. Fewer cars, more deliberate. People arriving this early were arriving on purpose, and their arrivals carried intention rather than routine. Warren Hargrove's truck was already there. A late model F250 black, the kind of vehicle that announces its owner without requiring the owner to say anything. Parked in the visitor space nearest the entrance, not marked reserved, but understood by the logic of such things to belong to whoever had the most claim to the building. She sat in the passenger seat for a moment. Through the windshield, the Columbus sky was doing what it does in late October, starting blue and cold and very clear, as if the air had been rinsed overnight and was still new. The kind of sky that makes the distances between things look shorter than they are. She got out of the car. The conference room was at the end of the administrative wing, past the principal's office, and a bulletin board that had not been updated since September. The door was closed but not locked. Through the small, reinforced glass window, she could see the arrangement of people inside. The principal sat at the head of the table. To his left, 2 people she didn't recognize, board members, from their posture, from the way they held folders in front of them. To his right, the vice principal and a woman who appeared to be taking notes. On the near side of the table, with their backs to the door, Cole and Warren Hargrove sat side by side. Warren occupied his chair with the complete and effortless authority of a man who had sat in enough rooms that the sitting itself had become a statement. His hands were flat on either side of his folder, either relaxed or a performance of relaxation, and she suspected the distinction had long since stopped mattering to him. Cole was looking at the table. His shoulders carried something that had nothing to do with posture. His hands were in front of him, perfectly still, in the way hands are still when they are being held that way deliberately. No metal visible. He was not turning anything in his pocket. She noted this, filed it away. She was about to put her hand on the door when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. The counselor was walking down the corridor toward her, the same woman from Tuesday morning, the one with the manila folder she had turned label side down on her desk, the one who had said 5 words to a nearly empty room. She was carrying something. A file. She stopped when she saw Sloane standing at the conference room window, and for a moment they simply looked at each other across the length of the hallway. Then the counselor walked the distance between them and stopped beside her. "You're going in," the counselor said. Not a question. "Yes," Sloane said. The counselor looked at the conference room door. Then she held the file out. Sloane took it. She opened it. Her name on the tab, her competition records inside the documentation that had traveled with her enrollment papers through 6 schools that she had never asked anyone to suppress and had never asked anyone to use. The federation letters, the rankings, the certificates of completion from each world championship. 3 gold medals documented with the precision of people who understood that precision was itself a form of respect. "I kept it out of general circulation," the counselor said, "because you'd been here 9 days and you hadn't asked me to do anything with it." That seemed like its own kind of answer. She looked at the door. "But if you're walking in there, you should be walking in with everything." Sloane looked at her. "The morning I enrolled," Sloane said, You said something like, let her have this one. The counselor was quiet for a moment. You heard that? Yes. I meant it, the counselor said. Every kid who comes through that office deserves the right to be new, to be nobody for a little while. She looked at the conference room door. But nobody is over now, and that file is yours. It was always yours. Sloan looked at the file in her hands. Then she looked at the counselor. Thank you, she said. The counselor nodded once. She turned and walked back down the corridor, and she did not look back. Sloan held the file. Her mother stepped up beside her. She looked at the file, then at her daughter. She did not say anything. She moved to the door. Sloan put her hand on the door and opened it. The sound of the door brought every head in the room up at once, the synchronized attention of a room that has organized itself for a purpose and been interrupted before that purpose is underway. The principal's expression moved through several registers in the span of 2 seconds: recognition, uncertainty, and rapid assessment of whether protocol existed for this situation and whether it matched what he would choose to do with it. Warren Hargrove's expression did not move at all. Cole looked at her for a moment and then looked at his hands. She walked in. Her mother held the threshold, not retreating, just holding the administrative record of this moment, the fact that a parent was present and had witnessed the door being opened. Ms. Reeves, the principal said carefully, this is a closed proceedings. Board policy on student disciplinary hearings, she said without raising her voice, under Section 11.4 of the Ohio Administrative Code, allows for student presence in proceedings that directly concern their conduct record. She said it the way she said most things, evenly, without performance, with the confidence of someone who had read the language 3 times and could reproduce it accurately without needing to look at anything. My conduct record is the subject of this meeting. My mother is my parent or guardian representative. She looked at him. I'd like to be in the room. The vice principal opened her mouth and then closed it. The note-taker stopped writing. Warren Hargrove's hands remained flat on either side of his folder. The principal looked at the board members. One made a small gesture, not quite a nod, more an adjustment of posture that conveyed neutrality leaning toward permissibility. The other looked at the folder in front of them. All right, the principal said in the tone of a man adding an item to a list he had not made and was now managing instead of the meeting he had planned. Please sit down. She sat down, at the side of the table across from Warren and Cole. Her mother moved a chair from against the wall without asking and positioned it at the perimeter of the room. Warren Hargrove looked at her mother. Then he looked at Sloan, the first time he had really looked at her. She looked back. He was a man in his early 50s who had been physically large his whole life and had organized his identity around it the way people do when a fact about themselves turns out early on to be a form of currency. The jaw she had noted in the photographs in Cole's house was heavier in person, and the eyes were sharp, the kind of sharpness that comes from spending a long time watching for things that threaten the arrangement of your life. She was not what he had expected to walk through the door. She could see this in the 2 seconds it took him to recalibrate. The principal introduced the attendees for the record. He stated the purpose of the meeting in formal institutional language, a review of a conduct incident on Tuesday, October the 9th, involving physical contact between 2 students, resulting in a formal review request submitted by a parent of one party. He invited Warren Hargrove to address his concerns. Warren opened his folder with the ease of a man who had done this in enough rooms that the action was itself a kind of statement. He laid out 2 sheets of paper and a printed screenshot in a specific arrangement, organized, deliberate, designed to look like evidence. He spoke well. She had expected this. A man who had attended board meetings and booster dinners and donor events for 20 years would have learned how to speak in a register that combined plain-spoken reasonableness with the vocabulary of institutional concern. He did not describe his son as a victim. He described the incident as a situation involving a student whose competitive background placed her in a fundamentally different category from other students, a category that created an asymmetry of physical capacity the school had an obligation to account for. He used the word liability 3 times in 4 minutes. He placed the screenshot of her competition record on the table and pushed it toward the board members. He described a student who, despite presenting herself as a typical enrollee, was a professional-level trained competitor with a documented history of high-impact martial arts competition, whose response to what he characterized as a minor social interaction had produced a result that was disproportionate and potentially dangerous to other students. He did not look at Cole while he spoke. Cole looked at his hands. She sat through all of this with the stillness she had used in the hallway, not absent, not frozen, but held. The kind of stillness that does not diminish under the weight of being watched. When Warren finished, the principal turned to her. Ms. Reeves, would you like to respond to these concerns? She looked at the principal. Then she looked at Warren Hargrove and held his gaze for a moment. Then she set the counselor's file on the table in front of her. She did not open it. She left it there closed and let what it represented sit in the room alongside everything else that had been placed on this table today. Then she looked at Cole. He was still looking at his hands. She did not look away from him. I'm not in this room to defend myself, she said. I know what happened in the hallway. So does everyone in this room because 47 phones recorded it. I know why I responded the way I did, and I know every decision I made in the 3 seconds that decision was available to me. She paused. That's not what I want to talk about. Warren Hargrove's expression shifted, just fractionally. I want to talk about a sketchbook, she said. The room went very quiet. Cole's hands moved a small involuntary shift, the kind that happens in the body directly before a flinch arrives and gets stopped. Freshman year, she said. Parking lot outside the field house after a game. I don't know exactly what was in it. Drawings, I think. The kind of thing you keep when you've been doing something long enough that you need a place to put it. She looked at the center of the table, not at Warren. Someone took that book and dropped it in a trash can in front of approximately 15 people. And then they said something. Different people remember different exact words, but they all agree on the shape of it. She let the room sit with this. I've been at this school for 9 days, she said. I'm not from here. I don't know most of the people in this building, or the history, or who donated what to which part of the facility. One beat. But I know what a person looks like when they've been told in front of witnesses that the thing they're best at is the wrong thing to be best at. She looked at Cole. He had looked up. He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on his face in any of the 4 times she had been close to him. Not the performance, not the anger, not the hollow thing underneath both. Something older than any of those. Something that had been covered by a lot of material for a long time but was still, when reached, perfectly intact. I know what that does, she said, to a person, to a 16-year-old specifically. I know what happens to the part of you that used to do the thing you were told not to do. It doesn't go away. It turns. It converts itself into something else, something that can fill a hallway and hold a school together through intimidation, because intimidation requires the same energy as talent, and the energy has to go somewhere. Warren Hargrove said, I don't see what this has to do. I'm not finished, she said. No raised voice, no heat, just the quality of something that was going to continue until it was done. Warren stopped. The note-taker wrote something. I'm not here to defend myself, she said again, because I don't need to. Cole grabbed my wrist. I responded with controlled defensive technique and stopped the moment it was over and caused no injury. You have 47 recordings of this. The conversation about liability is a conversation about the wrong person. She looked at the board members. That's the legal question, and there are people better qualified than me to answer it. She looked at the table. The question I'm actually interested in is what a school is for, not the building, not the weight room. What is the institution for? She looked up. Because if the answer is producing people who are skilled at performing strength and hiding everything else, then this meeting is very well organized and everyone in this room should be satisfied. But if the answer has anything to do with the actual people inside the building, then there's a different conversation to have. And it probably starts with asking why a boy who could draw is running a hallway instead. The room was very quiet. Warren Hargrove had the expression of a man who has walked into a room expecting a certain kind of terrain and found it has been replaced by something different. He was recalibrating, not panicking, nothing so dramatic, but making the rapid small adjustments of a man whose gravity has found for possibly the first time in some while that it is not fully operative in this room. He opened his mouth. Cole said, she's right. 2 words. The room turned to him. He was looking at the table. Not at his father, not at Sloan, not at the principal. At the surface in front of him, with the expression of someone who has been aware of a weight for a long time and is finally prepared to pick it up in front of people. She's right, he said again. His voice was not dramatic. It was not the voice of someone making a speech. It was the voice of someone stating something they have been aware of for some time and have found no previous occasion to say out loud in a room that would actually hear it. About the sketchbook. About all of it. Warren said very quietly, Cole. Cole looked at his father. This was a different thing than any of the looking that had happened in the room so far. It was a look with history in it, the compressed weight of a specific and long relationship with its own language and its own economy and its own silences that mean more than either party's words. She's right, Cole said, for the third time, as if repetition were the structural element that made the statement load-bearing. As if saying it once might be revocable, but saying it 3 times made it a fact in the room that the room would have to accommodate. Warren said nothing. The principal looked at both of them. Then he looked at Sloan. He was a man she understood now who had been trying for some time to navigate the space between what was right and what was possible in a building that someone else had partially paid for. This was not a character failure. It was the condition of a great many people who lived between institutional integrity and institutional reality. And it was a condition that produced a specific kind of fatigue around the eyes, the fatigue of a person who has been managing a negotiation they never wanted to be in. She had no particular anger for him. "I'd like to make a request," she said. He waited. "No disciplinary action for Cole for this incident." The vice principal looked up sharply from her notes. One of the board members made a small sound. Warren Hargrove's expression moved through several places rapidly and arrived somewhere she had not expected. Somewhere that was not strategy and was not anger, but something older and less organized than either. "He grabbed your wrist," the principal said. "I know what he did," she said. "I also know what I did. And I know what this room was about to do, make an official record out of a situation that the 2 people most directly involved in it have a chance of moving past if the official record doesn't make it permanent." She looked at the principal steadily. "I'd like that chance." The principal looked at her for a long moment. He looked at Warren Hargrove. Warren held his gaze for a moment and then looked at Cole, and Cole looked at the table, and the triangle of that was its own kind of language that the room absorbed without anyone translating it. The principal looked at his folder. He closed it. "Mr. Hargrove," he said, "I'd like to table the formal conduct review." He said it in the tone of a man who has decided something and is stating it as procedure rather than preference, which was the most credible way he knew to say it. "In my assessment, the documentation does not support a finding of disproportionate conduct. The incident, as recorded, constitutes a defensive response to physical aggression from a student who, as this file makes clear, had every capability to respond with considerably more force and chose not to." He looked at both board members. Neither objected. "I'll be noting all of that in the record." He looked at Warren Hargrove. "The review is closed." Warren looked at the principal for a moment. Then he looked at the closed folder in front of him. He looked at his son. Cole was looking at the table. Warren picked up his papers. He put them back in his folder methodically in the order he had taken them out. He stood. He walked out of the room without saying anything else. The door closed behind him, and the room held the particular silence that follows when a large force has been in a space and then left it. "You're excused, Ms. Reeves," the principal said. "Thank you for coming in." She walked out of the conference room into the administrative corridor. Her mother was beside her. Her mother's hand found her shoulder briefly, not a grip, just a contact the way you touch something to confirm it is real, and then dropped away. The corridor was empty. Through the windows along the south wall, she could see the parking lot beginning to fill with the first arrivals of the school day students crossing asphalt in the October cold with their hands in their pockets and their breath visible. She stood in the corridor for a moment. A door opened behind her. She turned. Cole walked out of the conference room alone. The door closed. He stood in the corridor about 10 feet from where she was looking at her with the expression from inside the room, the one that was not the performance, and not the anger, and not the hollow thing underneath both. Her mother took 2 steps away and turned to examine the bulletin board as though it contained information she needed. Cole reached into his jacket pocket. He took out the medal. He held it for a moment looking at it. She could see from where she stood the way the ribbon was softer in one spot than the rest, the spot her thumb had worn smooth over 2 years of competition, nerves in locker rooms and warm-up areas across 3 continents. She had not expected to feel anything in particular when she saw it again. She felt something particular. He walked toward her. He held it out. She did not take it immediately. She looked at it in his hand, at the worn fabric, at the gold surface that was not quite as bright as it had been the afternoon they placed it around her neck and soul, which was what 2 years of being carried everywhere does to anything. She took it. Cole stood a foot away. Neither of them said anything for a moment. The corridor held the acoustic quality of institutional spaces in the early morning, not empty exactly, but before the full weight of the day has settled into it. "I should have given it back day one," he said. She looked at the medal in her palm. "Why didn't you?" she said. He was quiet, not the dramatic pause of someone composing a speech, but the genuine pause of someone locating an honest answer in a place where they don't usually look for things. "Because I thought knowing your secret gave me power over you," he said. He looked at the metal rather than at her. Like if I had the thing that explained you, I had leverage. He said the word with the tone of someone who grew up speaking a language and is only now hearing what some of the words actually sound like. I figured if I had the real version of you, the one that showed why you could do what you did, I'd have something. He looked at her. Turns out you just didn't have one. A secret. Any of it, he said. You weren't hiding anything. You just weren't performing it. She looked at him. He was 17 years old and she could see it clearly now in a way. The hallway and everything after had not quite allowed, not the boy who had stepped into her path on Tuesday morning. Something behind that, something younger and more intact and more damaged than the version he walked around in most of the time. The drawing, she said. He looked away briefly, then back. You still doing it, she said. He made a small sound that was not quite a laugh, the sound of someone who has learned to convert a particular kind of sadness into something that takes up less space. No, he said. She looked at him steadily. You should be, she said. He said nothing. She put the medal into her jacket pocket. Her thumb found the worn spot on the ribbon without looking for it, from the knowledge that comes from carrying something long enough that you know it better than you know most things. What you said in there, she said, that took something real. Cole looked at the floor. I've known it for a while, he said. What she said about the sketchbook, about what it does to a person. I knew it was true before she said it. I just hadn't said it in a room. He stopped. In a room with him in it. Yeah, she said. She looked at him. Cole, she said. He looked at her. That's a hard room to say true things in. I know because I just did it. She adjusted her backpack strap. It gets less impossible. Every time you do it and mean it, it gets less impossible. She walked away. He stood in the corridor. He stood there for a moment that had no performance in it, no audience, no particular shape, just a boy in a hallway deciding what to do with his hands now that they were empty. Then he turned toward the far end of the administrative wing where the counselor's office was and started walking. The day passed the way days pass after something that has shifted the ground slowly at first, and then with a strange velocity, as if ordinary time is making up for the time it spent holding its breath. She went to class. She sat in her usual seat in first period and took notes and answered one question correctly and without elaboration, and left when the bell rang. She did this through 4 periods. In third period, a boy she had never spoken to stopped her in the doorway and said that what she had done in the meeting was something. She looked at him. He looked like he wanted to continue but wasn't sure where. I just told them what I saw, she said, and went inside. At lunch, she went to the cafeteria. Not the library, the cafeteria. She stood in the serving line and got a tray and found the table near the emergency exit and sat down. Marin arrived 3 minutes later. She set her tray down and opened the worn notebook, and for a few minutes they ate without talking, which was one of Marin's capacities. She had come to value specifically the ability to be in a silence without requiring it to become something else. I heard it went differently than Warren expected, Marin said. A few things did, Sloan said. Marin wrote something in her notebook. Write something for the school paper, Sloan said. Marin looked up. Not the meeting, not the hallway. Sloan looked at her tray. Write about what a building does to the people inside it over time. What it teaches them about who's allowed to take up space and what happens to the ones who take up the wrong kind. She paused. That's the story. Marin looked at her for a long moment. That's a complicated story, Marin said. I know, Sloan said. Write it anyway. Marin wrote something in the notebook and did not offer to show what it said. After a while, other students drifted to the table, not in the way of people approaching a subject without the quality of performance or audience seeking that had been there on Wednesday. Just students who had decided without any apparent coordination that this was a reasonable place to eat lunch. A girl from third period. A boy who sat in the back of fifth. They sat and opened their lunches, and the conversation moved the way cafeteria conversation moves when nobody is performing for anyone loosely without agenda, from one subject to the next and back again. She ate her lunch. She was not for those 30-some minutes an exhibit. She noticed this without making anything of it, which was itself a kind of progress. At the end of the day, after the final bell, she took the long way to her locker, through the corridor along the back of the gymnasium. She passed the entrance. She stopped. The brass plaque was beside the door. Warren T. Hargrove, in recognition of outstanding support to Westbrook High School athletic programs. She stood in front of it for a moment. It was a piece of metal on a wall. It recorded a fact accurately. Something had been given and something had been received. And this was the mark of that exchange, the way all such marks are made in institutional spaces, permanent and contextless and true only in the narrowest sense of the word. She looked at it. Then she walked to her locker, made the second number adjustment. The locker opened on the second try. She reached into her jacket pocket. The medal was there. She could feel the worn spot on the ribbon without looking. She held it for a moment, just held it inside the pocket where it had always belonged. Then she took it out and looked at it. The face, the stylized figure and stance, the lettering around the edge. She turned it over. Her name, the city, the number that meant first. She looked at it for the length of time it took to understand what she wanted to do with it. Then she put it back, closed her locker, shouldered her backpack, and walked out of the building. She did not see what happened after she left, but Marin learned about it later from two different sources who agreed on every detail, which was the closest you could get to certainty in a building full of people who experienced the same events through different lenses. Cole Hargrove walked to the counselor's office directly after the final bell, which meant the decision had been made before the school day was officially over. He stood at the door for 4 minutes. Students moved past him in the post-bell current. Some looked at him. He did not look at them. He stood with one hand at his side and the other at the end of his arm, in a way that was not a fist and was not relaxed the way hands look when they are holding a decision that has not yet been made physical. He stood there. Then he reached up and knocked. The door opened from the inside. The counselor looked at him with an expression that both sources described the same way, the expression of someone who had been waiting for this without ever having said so and who was not going to say anything. Now that would make it harder than it already was. Cole went inside. The door closed behind him. In the parking lot below, Warren Hargrove's truck sat in the visitor space nearest the entrance. He had remained in the building after the meeting and conversations Sloan had not been part of, in the corridor outside the principal's office, with his folder under his arm and his hands performing the particular stillness of a man whose argument has not been accepted, but who has not yet decided what to do about that. What she knew because Marin had seen it from the second-floor library window during her free period and had written it down in the worn notebook, because she had learned that the things people do when they think nobody is watching are the truest data available, was this. Warren Hargrove walked out of the building at 2:46 in the afternoon. He walked to his truck. He got in. He sat in the driver's seat. He did not start the engine. He did not take out his phone, did not open his folder, did not look at anything in particular through the windshield. He just sat. The parking lot filled and then emptied around him. Students crossed the asphalt. Buses moved through their routes. Teachers walked to their cars in the small groups and individual solitudes of people at the end of a working day. He sat. Marin watched for 11 minutes. She wrote it down, the time the truck, the man in the driver's seat who was not moving and was not doing anything and was not going anywhere. She wrote it not because she knew what it meant, but because something in her, the part that had been paying careful attention to this building and its people for 3 years, understood that this particular stillness was worth recording. At 2:57, he started the engine. He pulled out of the visitor space. He drove away. Sloan walked home through the late afternoon with her hands in her pockets, the left one resting loosely around the metal through the fabric of her jacket. Not gripping it, just aware of it, the way you're aware of something you've been carrying long enough that the weight of it has become part of how you understand what your body is doing. She walked without hurry. She went 2 blocks out of her direct way to pass the park, with the row of maples doing what maples do in October in Ohio, turning a red that existed at the outermost edge of what that word could contain. She walked through the colored shadow they cast across the sidewalk and came out the other side into the low, clear afternoon. She thought about Seoul. She thought about the afternoon she had stood on a podium in a gymnasium full of people she didn't know, with a medal around her neck, and her mother in the stands, and her coach at the side with his arms crossed and his jaw working the way it worked when he was trying not to show what he was feeling. She thought about the girl from Portugal she had competed against in the final, how the handshake afterward had carried something that words couldn't have carried, the wordless acknowledgement that passes between two people who have been through something hard together. She had been 14 then. She was 16 now, and she had won 3 times, and she did not know with any certainty what she was going to do with the rest of it. The competition years, the training, the specific and large things she was capable of, which was also the specific and large thing that had made her life into this shape: 6 schools, 4 years, a backpack with a worn medal in the pocket, and a new locker combination she had to compensate for on the second number every time. She didn't know. And she understood in a way she had not always understood that not knowing was something she was allowed to carry alongside everything else. That certainty was not a requirement for forward movement. The training had given her this not certainty, but the capacity to function inside uncertainty with something resembling steadiness, to be in a moment that had not resolved and to keep moving through it anyway. She walked. She thought about Cole standing in a corridor with his hands at his sides. She thought about a sketchbook in a trash can. She thought about what it costs a person over years, the long accumulating interest of being told that the thing you are best at is the wrong thing to be. She had no clean thought about any of this, no tidy resolution. She did not arrive on that walk at a conclusion. She arrived at the next thing, which was the only place you ever actually arrived. She turned onto her street. Her mother's car was in the driveway. Through the front window, she could see the kitchen light on. Movement in there, her mother at the counter, the glow of a laptop on the kitchen table, the ordinary administration of an evening beginning. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment. This was the house she lived in. For now. For this school year or some part of it, or some longer span, if the things set in motion today continued to move the way she thought they might. She did not know how long. She had learned not to make too many plans around duration because duration was the variable she had the least control over. What she knew was this. She had walked into a room today that she was not supposed to walk into. She had said true things in it, which is different from winning an argument. She had said them in front of people who had the power to do something with them or not, and she did not know yet everything they would choose. She had watched a 17-year-old boy say two words that cost him something real in front of his father in a room designed to produce a very different outcome. She had watched a man sit alone in a parking lot for 11 minutes, not starting his engine, not going anywhere. She did not know what any of it would produce in the weeks and months that followed. She did not know most of it. What she knew specifically, and with the certainty of her own body, was that she had not left. She had not done the math on the long way out. She had stayed inside the situation long enough for it to become something different from what it had been when she arrived in it. This was not a small thing. In her experience, it was most of the thing. She walked up the front path. She opened the door. Her mother looked up from the counter. She set her backpack down. She took her jacket off and hung it on the hook by the door. The metal was in the pocket where it had always belonged. She walked into the kitchen. Her mother moved to make room for her at the counter without being asked, not with performance, not with words, just by moving over slightly and returning to what she was doing, which was the most useful kind of welcome and the kind her mother had always known how to give. She leaned against the counter. Outside the window, the last light of October was finishing its work on the maple in the backyard, pulling the red back into itself as the sky shifted toward the colors of early evening. In an hour, it would be dark. In a few weeks, it would be cold in the way Columbus gets cold in November, seriously and without apology, the kind of cold that doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is. She stood in the kitchen with her mother. She thought about tomorrow, not the rest of it, not the hearing and its aftermath, not Warren Hargrove and what he would do next, not Cole, and what opening a counselor's door might or might not lead to. Not any of it, just tomorrow, which was Saturday. No school, no situation to navigate, no building to read before she walked into it. She had no particular plan for the morning, which was something she had not been able to say in several months. This felt unexpectedly like something worth having. Some people spend their whole lives making sure no one ever sees them lose. You know the kind. You may have coached one or raised one or worked alongside one for years before you understood what you were actually looking at. The person for whom every room is a competition and every interaction carries a standing or a losing. The person who learned early and from someone they trusted that the cost of being seen to fail was something they could not afford. So they built over years and with considerable effort a structure around themselves that kept the failing where no one could see it. And inside that structure, because it kept them safe because it worked, they stopped being able to do much of anything else. Think about what that costs. Not the obvious cost. The long one, the one that doesn't show up all at once but accrues quietly year after year in the daily conversion of energy from one form into another because the original form was declared wrong and thrown away in front of people who were supposed to be on your side and the energy had to go somewhere. A hallway, a school, a room where a man sits at the head of a table and places documents in a deliberate arrangement and uses the word liability 3 times in 4 minutes. All of it is somewhere for the energy to go. The ones who finally stop, you can always tell. They get very quiet. Not the quiet of defeat, that's a different thing, and most people who've been around long enough know the difference. Not the silence of a person who has given up on something they wanted. Something else. Something that is in its own way considerably harder to reach. The quiet of a person who has set something down. Something heavy. Something they carried for a long time and discovered in the setting down that their hands are free. That's what that hallway was about. Not a girl who could fight. A girl who had decided in the 3 seconds it took to execute a technique she had spent 10 years perfecting that the best use of everything she knew was to stop, not to win. To hold. To do less than she was capable of doing, which is almost always the harder thing. And a boy who needed more than he needed anything else that year to watch someone make exactly that choice. For those of you who've coached or raised a child or spent time inside a system that said it valued people while it ground them into the shapes it needed them to be, you've seen it. The energy that has nowhere to go. The room that never gets quiet. Does this match what you remember?